This is Seventh Generation Warfare. I am your current host, John Nelson, and in this episode, we will be looking at ReadySide up questions in regards to the food classification. So, if you remember from previous videos about being ReadySide up, it's about readiness, resiliency, and self reliance against personal, natural, and societal disaster, not only for yourself in your sixth generation warfare, in order to make sure that your will cannot be compromised by sudden misfortune, but also uh, gaining that readiness for your whole family so that you can secure the will of your children. So that's what Ready Side Up is and how it pertains to seventh generation war. In a previous video, we looked at some of the concerns from personal, natural, and societal disasters that you might want to prepare for. And then I told you that there's 7 classifications: food, water, shelter, security, economics, community, and fitness. And that we would look over those in individual videos. So this is the food one. But as we go through these classifications, you want to remember that you don't want to dive too deep into just one classification or just 2 classifications and leave the other ones empty handed. Anything that I go over in all the classifications could be an undoing for you. And so you want to build your readiness, resiliency, and self-reliance holistically across all the classifications, not just focus on one because it makes you feel comfortable or whatever. So although we're only going to go over the food questions here, hopefully when all the videos are out, you'll look at all the videos together. You'll audit your whole readiness posture, and you'll start to really analyze what your weak points. So let's get into it. Food. Um, this is nutrition for self, animals, and land. Anything that pertains to those sort of things is kind of grouped into the food classification. So starting off, what is your diet description? As you're looking at how to build out uh, preparations for your food, you don't want to do things that don't sit with your diet. The common example is everyone likes to put in long-term storage rice and beans, but if you don't have rice and beans in your normal day-to-day diet, then when if you do need to break into your long-term food storage and you're eating rice and beans and you're going to be constipated and uncomfortable, perhaps some more forethought into those sort of things could alleviate that struggle. Also, dietary restrictions is another thing. So if you're lactose intolerant or have a gluten insensitivity or whatever, just keep those things in mind, and it's worth making a note of those. And also, this isn't just about yourself, it's about your family. And you could be asking these questions of extended family or friends. So if you're asking these questions of other people for their audit, you want to make sure that you're pulling all that information out, because they might not be in the same mindset. They might only be slightly interested. They might not have thought of all these things. So the more questions you ask, the more you can pull the information out. So diet description, diet restrictions. A question I like to ask is do people fast, or have they built fasting into their routine, so to speak? I do a 24-hour fast every week, Friday night to Saturday night. And if I communicate this to people, more times than not, they say something like, "Oh, I could never do that," or, I'd get the shakes, or I'd get hangry, or my blood sugar, blah blah blah. People are addicted to food, and their bodies need that constant replenishment. And no doubt they could get through it if they really tried, but they haven't tried. So in a disaster situation, you might go without food for an extended period of time. So building in that mental clarity and wherewithal to keep your mental faculties going clearly when you're without food, it's a good thing to practice. And also, there's all kinds of uh, bio biochemical things that happen in your body that could have positive health effects as well. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not giving any nutritional advice here. I think it's worth it just for the mental training, but I think there are health benefits that go along with it too. So, is there any fasting, or have people done fasting? What kind of supplements do people add into their diet? Are they supplements by necessity or by preference? If somebody really, some people think supplements don't do much of anything. Other people think they're vital for healthy nutrition. I'm neutral on the topic, but if I was asking people if they were really into supplements, well, then I would make sure that they store some away for a rainy day. Keep more on hand than they need. Also, with supplements, looking into alternative forms of supplements. What kind of natural things, and we'll get into foraging in a little bit, but you might be able to forage in your own environment for some of the vitamins and minerals and nutrients that the people are supplementing for might be right out the back door. So learning to be aware of those things. This is a big question, and this is getting into the meat and potatoes of the subject. What percentage of a person's food comes from grocery store? And I put it in a percentage. No one's ever going to know exactly, but getting a good sense of, most people probably say, 100%. Well, 75%, because we eat out about a quarter of the time. But or maybe they've used a lot of farm stores, which is what we ultimately be going for, or gardening themselves. But when you put it in a percentage, people will start to see their dependency on these things. And when you bring up, how supply chains and egg shortages, or the shelves starting to look empty in March of 2020, those sort of things, when you realize, like, oh no, I get 100% of my food from the grocery store, and yeah, I don't actually trust that it will always be there. It'll get the people thinking and feeling the necessity to do more. Also, what kind of distance do they have to go to the grocery store? Is another question. And what kind of grocery store is it? Is it a small operation, that have one or two locations, or is it a giant grocery conglomerate that has dozens of locations? Might play into how vulnerable they are in getting food from there reliably. So piggybacking off that is, do they shop at any farm stores or participate in any CSAs? CSA being what does CSA stand for? Community supported agriculture, I believe, where you pay in advance before the season starts, and then you're granted a certain amount of crops throughout the season. And this is a good way to not only support food production in your local area, there is a reason to support local, because you need the capabilities in your community, but we can talk more about that when we get to the community classification. And doing it before disaster strikes, you get in with the farmers. If the farmers know your name, they're going to be more likely to continue to service you when disaster strikes and everyone's knocking on their door trying to get food. Farmers will become the most popular people, and it's good to be on good terms with them ahead of time. Next question, what does your pantry look like, or what does the person you're asking these questions of, what does their pantry look like, not only in physical size, but what is the pantry readiness? Okay, so perhaps they have a small closet in their kitchen, and they're using it for cat food and a vacuum cleaner. not really ready, or perhaps they have a very large walk-in closet that's built under a set of stairs or next to a set of stairs or something, and it's stocked up with months and months worth of food. When it comes to food readiness, I say that the best thing to do is first and foremost is have that rotating pantry. If you have a handful of items you eat regularly, there's no reason you can't store many on hand. And to know how many to store on hand, you look at the expiration date, figure out how many you'd reliably eat in the time between now and when it's due to expire, and you can reliably have that many on hand. So, uh, like pasta, I don't know, 75 boxes of pasta on hand or something like that, because I know my family will eat them. They stay good for several years each, and so it's safe to have them. And this also plays into economics with the inflating dollar. You're buying the food now at a cheaper rate than you're actually going to buy it. So it's an investment that's actually keeping up with inflation. So if that makes sense. But this goes for pastas, all kinds of sauces. In refrigerator space, cheese stays good for a really long time. All kinds of canned goods, and then you can get into freezer space too. But having that rotating pantry and I would say most people can get close to having enough food on hand for an entire winter, just in a pantry. You don't need to go to the long term food storage, the 30-year freeze dried or dried foods. If you have a sufficient pantry, and that's I think is the goal. You should, in my mind, have enough food that if frost hits in October and all the plants die and there's no more growing anything to support yourself outside, that you have enough food from then to March or April when stuff starts growing again, to get through that period, so that you can survive winter, and then when spring comes you can hit it hard with the gardening or anything else. Next question: long-term food storage. We touched on it briefly. Certainly, it is not a bad idea to have some, but a lot of times I think when people get into prepping and such, that they run right to the long-term food storage because there's plenty of companies advertising it online, and they do it on scary programming. They scare you out of your wits talking about the new doom and gloom scenario, and then they say, here, why don't you buy our 30-year food storage? Oh, by the way, since we're so overpriced, we'll give you buy a 6-month pack and we'll give you another month for free. It's all a scam. It's way overpriced. And there are things you should be doing before that, in my opinion. Next question. And these are about what people are doing on their own property. So, do they have a vegetable garden? What size is it? What type of plants are they growing, etc.? What are their gardening skills? Is there, perhaps you're in an apartment and you have very limited space. Doesn't mean you can't grow things. There's plenty of ways to grow stuff on a 4x10 deck that is in an apartment complex. Or if you have some acreage and you can garden on your own land. Different scenarios for different people, and different skill levels might give reason to start at different levels too. So if you've never gardened before, it's probably best to just start with a few crops and start to learn the basics rather than jumping full in. Orchard, nuts, and berries. Do they have any of those going on in their property? The best time to plant a fruit tree was 20 years ago. Second best time was 19 years, 364 days ago. So if you haven't planted a fruit tree, you should probably get on it if you have the land. Um, what kind of animals people have on their property, number, type, what kind of acreage they allow, what they could realistically support on their property. Those are all good questions. And then are people composting? So we talked about it's nutrition for foods. Food is nutrition for self, animals, and land. The composting is the nutrition for the land, giving back to the land. And you don't even just have to compost your own scraps. You should, but plenty of people are looking to get rid of organic matter. In the fall time, your neighbors might be looking to bag up their leaves and throw them away. You can collect those and you can add that organic matter into your soil, or potentially some neighbors with some livestock with their manure. You can be collecting that and putting it into your land and building the soil. Even if you're not a great, perhaps if you're not a good gardener, you don't realize that it starts with the soil. So get ahead of yourself if you're planning to build your interest in gardening over the next several seasons. Jump on it right away and building that soil, and protecting the soil too. Don't allow your soil to erode off your property by mishandling it. Foraging skills. What kind of foraging skills people had? We talked earlier about the ability to supplement with wild plants on your property, but that goes to foraging. There's so many possibilities out there, and from the earliest days in spring when the ground is thawed, you can be digging up roots, and in the spring and summer there's all kinds of abundance out there. And then in the fall, as stuff starts to go dormant, you can still be collecting stuff from the ground. So building those skills is a great skill to have for food security. Now, some more skills in say the kitchen, I suppose. Fermentation skills or cheese making skills, brewing skills or winemaking skills. Do people have any skills like that? Because in some of the more devastating scenarios out there, those complex products could become extremely hard to come by, and it could be a great part of your own diet, but it could also be a great barter item if you know how to make cheese or brew beer or the like. It also helps to store food longer. Adding that slight little alcohol into a liquid is a good way to keep liquids clean and contamination free, but also cheese, as we said before, stays good for a really long time. So instead of letting your milk spoil, if you have a milk animal or your neighbor has a milk animal, turn it into cheese and it'll stay good for a very long time. Along with that, canning and preservation skills. This could be the traditional canning, also freezing, but also dehydrating or freeze dry, using a freeze dryer. Any kind of food preservation skills you might have. It's also, if you have like a freeze dryer or a dehydrator, you don't need to go out and invest in those 30-year long-term food storages that are advertised to you on the scary shows. You can start doing it yourself. And if you do this from the beginning, if you're convinced, like, okay, I'm going to build up a year's supply of food, I would say it's probably a better investment to buy a freeze dryer and do it yourself than to go out and buy those products, because a lot of those products have a lot of added chemicals that you don't want necessarily, and preservatives and things like that. And you can control what is going into your long-term food storage. Next question, butchering and killing skills. Now, this ties actually very close to the security classification. In the security classification, I'll ask people's level of comfort about taking another human's life in self-defense. Presumably, we're not on the attack here, but butchering an animal could be a good way to get a little bit more comfortable with self-defense. But butchering animals is a good skill to have anyway. That if you could start it with something as small as a chicken and knowing how to dress a chicken instead of just getting, prepackaged breast meats and thighs, to know how to break down a chicken. But if you have larger animals, it's you might want to consider those skills. And with that is, or adjacent to that, is hunting and fishing. Also tying into that, the security piece of hunting teaches weaponry skills, firearm skills, rifle skills, and those could be helpful in your self-defense. But hunting is currently, hunting and fishing are good ways to get food, but in a bad disaster where everyone's going hungry, a lot of people are going to start hunting. So it could become pretty sparse in the woods pretty quick on getting food from nature. So that's why potentially bringing domesticated animals onto your property might be a wiser decision. And last question that I would ask if I was doing a evaluation for people is I would ask about their climate, as this kind of gives a backdrop for all these things. Not only what you can grow in your garden, but what animals you might be able to hunt and fish, etc. Kind of would be the backdrop for all that. So there's some food for thought on the food classification. I hope that this is insightful and gives you some things to start considering. But like I said, you don't want to take the food classification in and of by itself. You want to compare your readiness in the food classification next to all the other classifications to know where you should be paying your attention to. If you have a stocked pantry and you have small or medium-sized garden, you're doing some food growing and developing your skills and growing your own food, and you have enough food to survive winter in your pantry, and a couple local farmers, you're probably in a pretty good position, and you might want to consider some of the other classifications that you might be weaker in. But then you can always circle back and add on to what it is you need to do, and there really is no end to the security we can have in these regards. So this is 7th Generation Warfare. I'm your current host, John Nelson. This episode, we looked at the food classification for ReadySide Up. Please share, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.